Anthony Klan, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for being part of this series. I just want to go back a little way. You are a very successful award-winning journalist on The Australian for about 15 years. I mean, you won a Walkley, you're shortlisted for the Graham Perkin Award, and you won News Corporation's top awards. And but you left in about 2019, if I'm correct. What were the circumstances? I mean, why did you go?
Yeah, so 2019 I left. There was a couple of basically I'd sort of carved out a bit of a niche or carved out a niche for myself while I was at the paper. I started off writing residential property and worked my way up, doing investigative journalism for quite a lot of years. But I sort of developed a niche around investigative business journalism, financial journalism, and which was fantastic. So I'd write about business corruption, business figures doing the wrong thing. But I got to 2018 and I started writing about the superannuation sector and all the. I was actually asked to write about do an investigation into the superannuation sector, and I thought, no, great, couldn't believe my luck because I knew that there were many scams and it was rife with scams, and so I had the backing of the then editor in chief to investigate. So I did that and came up with a remarkable series of stories showing that half the then super funds were pretty much robbing Australians blind. There was billions of dollars a year being gouged. Massive problem, massive story. We ran a couple of them, and then the vested interest got involved and shut it all down, and I couldn't get the truth out. So I made up my mind that I had to leave then because I figured it's not a newspaper if you're not telling the truth, and if you're not getting out something like that. I mean, 1 in 2 Australians are getting massively ripped off and are getting massively ripped off. And probably a much higher proportion of those would be our readers, given that the newspaper had been bashing the so-called industry funds for years, when in fact it was the banks. As anyone who was giving it a reasonable look would realise. So anyway, I decided it was time to leave. Then it was just a matter of how and when. And early the following year, 2019, I was investigating foreign influence, Chinese influence, Chinese foreign visa scams, that sort of thing. And I got a really important story that went to the heart of national security and visa scams, et cetera, involving Chinese operations. And the paper was super excited, super keen to run them. I had to give them, a list of 8, I think it was, of all these stories I had, and I did that. And then it got completely shut down. So yeah, I couldn't get a word in at all. And it was coming up to the so-called miracle election of Scott Morrison. So he and Peter Dutton were both in charge of Home Affairs, or were in charge of immigration at the time. So it was extremely damaging for the coalition, which wasn't even an issue. I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about the scams. And I think I was never told why they shut it down. They just refused, and I pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and eventually quit because it couldn't come out. So I think my last day was the day before the federal election. And my take on it was and remains, had that come out and been published properly, there's no way this miracle election would have happened because it was so damning. It's so damaging. But anyway, so I left, and that was that. And I set up the Klaxon, and I'm here 5 years later.
Okay, so you left. Was the intention before you left to set up Klaxon? And by the way, it's a nice play on your name, but also Klaxon is a like a siren, right?
Yeah, warning
Hooter.
signal. A friend of mine is a copywriter in the States, came up with that sort of as a play on my surname as well as it being a siren. So that was pretty clever of him, I thought. No, not really. I originally thought I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay. So I kind of just quit and thought we'll see what happens. I knew I'd get a job somewhere if I needed it or wanted it. Well, I needed it. So I actually interviewed at a few places, didn't get a job either at The Guardian and ABC, a couple of interviews there, which I was actually quite surprised about because I had a really good, track record. I thought, well, I did. But anyway, so I spoke with Michael West, who was a good mate of mine and former colleague, who's obviously set up Michael West Media. And I'd spoken to him over a couple of years about what he'd been up to. And I thought, you know what, I could probably do that. So originally, though, I just thought I've got stories I need to get out, and I just had no avenue to get them out. And I actually sent ideas, really important stories, to The Age, to a couple of major outlets. Yeah, Channel 10, a number of places I approached with them wouldn't run them. It wasn't, much the same story as at the Australian, although not to the same extent. So I just set up a sort of, a bit of a hokey website, anthonyklan.com, and just put them on there just to get the stories out there, not really knowing what I was doing. And then after a very short amount of time, people were saying, well, how do we donate or support you? And I had no facilities for that. So I thought, oh, well, I better set up something a bit more permanent, which I did, and took it from there.
Okay, so Claxon, so what's the model? Are you for profit, non-profit, a hybrid? How's it all work?
Well, it'd be profit isn't a word that's arisen yet. um, Basically, the idea was, look, I came out of quite disturbed, really, about media, leaving the newspaper. And I just wanted to get the truth out, the facts out, the stories out, without any impediments. So I didn't want a paywall, number one, because no one knew who the Klaxon was. But most importantly, I just wanted to get it out. So, I mean, if you've got a paywall, that's great. I'm sure it would work reasonably well, but there'll be very far fewer audience and readers. And I think the stuff that I'm writing is super important. So it needs to get out there. So I followed the Michael West, what Michael West does. And it's basically, there's no paywall, and we just invite readers to voluntary donate, make voluntary donations or voluntary recurring donations, subscriptions, whatever you want to call it, like Guardian Australia. And I've sort of stuck with that. Over the years, I've kind of thought, geez, it'd be good to put a part paywall or something in. But at the moment, I'm sort of just scraping by, so I'm keen to keep away from paywall for as long as I can.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about funding. I mean, what kind of, who donates? Is it individuals or companies or corporations or non-profits or
It's all individuals.
do you get enough
It's all
do you get enough to keep it rolling?
Well, it's touch and go. It's been touch and go since the start.
Yeah.
But it's slowly increasing. But I mean, it's basically just me affording to pay my rent and my food bill and whatever. I mean, paying for the internet expenses. There's a few overheads as well, but not massively. But it's I don't need too much, but which is just as well because it really doesn't bring in much at all. But it's an ongoing battle, I think is the best way to put it. At the moment, it's just readers, and super fortunate for our readers. They've been fantastic. People will sign up, people will donate, people will throw in $20 or $50. And that really literally just keeps the lights on. And that's the model. So it'd be fantastic if we had corporate donors or company donors or philanthropists or anyone, but we don't as yet.
As we're discussing,
totally open to it.
Yeah, as we were discussing earlier, in the United States, the picture would be probably completely different with local community foundations and some of the bigger foundations pumping money into you. So, is what you're doing sustainable in your view?
It's sustainable. I don't know. I intend to sustain it. Yes, but right. I don't know that it's not a sustainable business model in that I don't think many people will be doing it because, you kind of have to do it for the love of it and for do it, driven by the fact that it's the right thing to do and that you're making a positive difference, as opposed to it actually paying the bills and paying for itself. So it's not really sustainable. I think in the US, it'd be beneficial as well because you've got, you add a zero to everything. So you've got a bigger audience, you've got more people reading, more people subscribing, supporting. So it is difficult.
Deductibility, right?
Well, yeah, we don't have tax deductibility. That's another thing. There's been a push for the government to introduce tax deductibility for media. And in the US, it's almost the standard, I think, for independent media that there's tax deductibility. It's very easy to do. Whereas in Australia, you've got to spend a bunch of money. It could take several years. It's a whole runaround, which is a bit ridiculous because you look at groups like the Institute of Public Affairs and these other junk think tanks that are clearly not charities, but all have tax charity, or many of them have tax charity deductible status because they've got expensive lawyers and accountants they can pay to set it up. So that's the sort of thing the government could set up extremely easily, but there hasn't been to date a great deal of impetus behind them doing that. I mean, it's pretty disappointing. I thought with the change of government, given the last government, the coalition rather, the one before, it over the 10 years to 2022, no other country fell farther down the corruption index than Australia. Australia and Hungary. So I'll say that again. Australia, in the decade to 2022, under the coalition, no country fell faster towards corruption than Australia. And we tied with Hungary of the OECD nations. And that's a big problem. Not many people know that, which is also a big problem. I think if you're a media and you're acting responsibly, that'd be all over the front page and that'd be a huge thing. But not many people know about it unless you're reading The Guardian. It's not really around, or the Klaxon, of course, you'd know all about it. But that's a big problem, and that to me speaks volumes. So I thought when you had this new government coming in, they were talking about transparency, accountability, the whole thing, National Anti-Corruption Commission, that actually get behind and support independent media and fact-based media, but they haven't really wanted to know about it. As we've all seen with the National Anti-Corruption Commission, that's basically been largely a stitch up, and it's been very disappointing on a lot of fronts. So we'll see what happens with this term, but I mean, it's not looking enormously promising given that they've actually been returned with a majority, in large part, I'd say, to Donald Trump and the MAGA. People being so frightened of heading down that path that they've gone, gee, I don't want to risk, don't want to risk Dutton going down that path. So anyway, so that's where we're at. Look, I hope to be proven wrong. And as I mentioned, there's this great group, the Local Independent News Association. It's been set up a couple of years ago, and that has been set up with some government funding. So that's a big tick in their corner, and it's doing a fantastic job. I mean, they've got very limited resources, but the team behind there is very small, but they're super hardworking and fantastic. So I'd give them the biggest shout out, and the government really needs to get behind them and sort of help out independent media for democracy,
Yep. It's a shame that passion doesn't pay the bills, eh?
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah.
How many like, have you got metrics or number of followers or views or figures or data?
Yeah, for sure. So audience is running at over 40,000 readers a month. And so we usually go by, unique monthly browsers or viewers is usually the metric. So 40,000 is pretty good. I mean, you're looking at a lot more than your regional newspaper, your Cairns Post or your Townsville Bulletin or something. On top of that, the readership's sort of AB demographic. I mean, it's your MPs, your lawyers, your accountants. It's across the board, but overwhelmingly skewed towards that sort of demographic, given that it's, the nuts and bolts legislation and getting right into it. And, but people of all walks are really appreciating our work, and just that sort of really detailed investigative journalism that sort of has impact. And I think you can sort of tell who's reading it and that sort of thing, given the impact that we've had to date. And it's been pretty remarkable, given that it's it's a pretty small outfit, as in it's just me, and thankfully people sharing it and that sort of thing. But I mean, we've been before. Articles have been drawn up before Senate inquiries at least half a dozen times, pointing to the Klaxon, saying X, Y, Z, and quoting it in full, and Senate submissions, and so we're making a difference. But I mean, the amount of difference we could make if I have had one or two other staff or something, just a little bit more funding would be remarkable. But you got to go with what you got.
Yep. And what kind of stories do you do? I think you tend to follow the money, as far as I can see from the stories I've seen. What are some of the ones you're most proud of? Just briefly.
Yeah, of course. It is follow the money. Look, I've got a background I studied a commerce degree, so I've got a background in finance, and I've always been interested in that, balance sheets, that sort of thing. But look, it's cliched for a reason. It always comes down to money and power, but power for money almost always. So follow the money. But look, there's just so many stories at the moment. Australia is far more corrupt than people would consider, and it's just sort of this casual corruption. The stuff that's not all right that people don't even realize, at the big end of town at least. But to the sort of stories I'm looking at, okay, at the moment I'm looking at this group Advance. I've been looking at it for 18 months now, or since the Voice referendum. It was the no campaign against the Voice referendum. It's sort of this US-style disinformation group that spreads a whole bunch of lies, and I'm not using that lightly, that they're outright lies, information that it knows is incorrect in order to sway public opinion, and it's aggressively doing that. So I've been digging into that, and I've gone over recently the last 5 years of financial accounts disclosures to see who's actually behind it, because I've written a story about this group and say, well, who is Advance? I mean, who is this outfit that claims that it's demolished the Greens, this election, etc.? And it doesn't have an office. It doesn't have a place of business. There's 3 directors, sure, that are on the directors form, but it's largely a nothing. And it's a Liberal Party sort of dark money outfit, as in it was set up by members of the Liberal Party originally. And the Liberal Party was its biggest funder last financial year by a factor of 10. So I'm looking into that group, who's funding it, who's behind it, and what it's up to next. And to me, that's super interesting, particularly in the context of disinformation, what's happened in the US. So I'm trying to be one step ahead. What's happening in the US? we were always, it's a lead indicator for Australia. We're always a bit behind it. So what are the threats? And so I've been looking a lot into that sort of dark money, and not just advanced. There's quite a few of them now, all over the place. But yeah, that's a large part of my work the last few weeks.
Okay. Do you worry about defamation, given the laws in Australia? That how do you protect yourself?
Yeah, so defamation. So Australia has the most, or some of the most, draconian defamation laws in the world. The government's done nothing to fix that. There was a push about 6 years ago by a couple of the major newspapers to combat it, but that lasted about 3 minutes and they left it. See, the defamation laws at the moment, they exist to suit the big end of town, the vested interests. They shut up. The only people that are benefiting from them, really, or are benefiting from the over-the-top laws, are people with heaps of money that want to shut up media, want to shut up debate. Because if you don't have heaps of money, you're not suing a newspaper to shut them up. At News Corp, I was referred to as the most legal reporter, as in my work was the most likely to go to the lawyers. So I spent a lot of time with the defamation lawyers, because obviously the Australian News Corp has deep pockets, and I had something like more than 90 legal threats, legal letters, etc., etc. Not one of them was successful, thankfully. One of them went to court, and we won, and then won on appeal, but it still cost the paper 700 grand or something crazy. So personally, I have only received 2 defamation threats since the 5 years of the Klaxon, which is fantastic, given the sort of stuff we write. It's always it's holding powerful to account, holding big money to account. Look, honestly, I think it's because I don't have any assets. It's not worth anyone's while suing me because I don't have any assets. So good luck. Like, I mean, it's to be as frank as that. That's it. If I did have, I know some other independent media outlets, people, for example, own their own homes and they're constantly receiving threats because it's something you can lose. But when I set this up, I don't have any property or any assets, and so that's that. And also, I don't defame anyone. I'm super careful. I know the defamation law intimately, and it's always a value decision, and it always is on any newspaper, what you run and what you don't run and how you write it. So I'm cognizant of all of that. On top of that, I've got multiple people that have come forward, barristers pro bono, who have offered to pro bono me, act for me pro bono on the 2 occasions that I did receive threats. So I think it wouldn't be worthwhile for someone to sue necessarily. But that said, there's always the threat. So yeah.
Yeah, that's always a concern, I guess. In terms of impact, you mentioned various inquiries and so forth, but you also there's media elsewhere that you publish. So some of your stories are picked up by Michael West and Independent Australia and Crikey, possibly, and others. And you're interviewed, about election results and so forth as well. So, you kind of getting noted in that way.
Yeah, and that's been fantastic. And I mean, it's just a matter of continue. Social media has been great. I mean, that's probably and Michael West said this to me years ago. He said that's what's really changed, is that the internet's been around obviously for quarter of a century, for most of us, but it was really the kicking off of social media 2013, 14, 15, thereabouts, and since then, more particularly, that it's really made it viable in that people can access independent media because you can push it out and get a lot of followers, and away you go. So yeah, social media has been fantastic on that front, and I'm always keen to do interviews or be contacted by people, and there have been a lot. I mean, sort of Triple R Radio and ABC, I do a monthly spot for them, and quite a lot. So that's been super helpful. Yeah.
Okay. And if someone wants to have a look at the site or get the a newsletter or whatever, where do they go? What do they do?
So just go to the Klaxon, klaxon.com.au, or just Google Klaxon News. You'll find it pretty easily. It comes up straight away. And yeah, it'll just pop up with a subscribe to the newsletter, put your name in, where you go. Give us a read and throw in a few bucks if you can.
Okay, mate. Look, thank you for your time, mate. All the best. And I think I like your work, and hopefully you'll find some stability down or sustainability down the road. And it's great to see. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Bill. Cheers.